Watkis, and I will be your Spanish teacher. Now today we're going to start by looking at the CXC syllabus and what the exams entail. Okay, bienvenidos a la clase de elessonclass.com. Okay, let's get started. Alright, the CXC Spanish, and we're going to look at the syllabus review. Now, first of all, the exam for CXC, there are 3 exams that you're going to be doing. You'll have the oral, you'll have the written paper, and you have listening comprehension. Now, in order to be prepared for all of these exams, there are a number of topics that you need to cover. Some of the topics you have already started or would have learned from grade 7, and they continue straight up to grade 11. But the topics that we are going to look at are the main ones that you need to master in order to do well in these 3 exams. Alright, now I'm going to make a list of the topics and just explain a few of them in a little more details. Alright, we have the present tense, and this has different sections. We have present tense of AR verbs, present tense of ER verbs, and the present tense of IR verbs. Now you need to know these in order to be able to answer questions, especially in your oral and also with the situations. Alright, the present tense, we also have to do the past tense. And the past tense is also referred to as the present tense. Alright, and this is a tense that you need to know in order to talk about things that happened in the past. And you will need this especially on the written exam, where you have to write a composition or letter about an event or an incident that took place. Now this topic, the past tense, it's a very long topic because in this topic we encounter a lot of irregular verbs. So we will spend a lot of time on this in order to be able to master it properly. Alright, another topic that we need to look at is the future tense. And as the topic suggests, you use this is a tense in which you learn to talk about what you'll do in the future, or to talk about future events, to ask about questions, to plan for the future. Right, now this tense is a little shorter than the other tenses because the endings that you need to learn in order to use these verbs is the same for the 3 sets of verbs, AR, ER, and IR. So this tense is one of the shortest tenses and probably one of the easiest ones to learn. Alright, after future tense, we also have the conditional tense. Alright, the conditional tense is the one in which you talk about what you would do based on certain conditions. And it's also one of the easier tenses as well because it uses the same endings for ER, IR, and AR verbs. So it's shorter to learn. It's not going to take as much time as the present tense and the past tense. Also, we have the subjunctive. Now the subjunctive is not really considered to be a tense, it's just considered to be a mood because you use it, it's a set of verbs that you use in certain situations based on whether you're expressing a particular feeling, doubt, desires, and so on. But when we start doing the topics, you will understand some more about this. Okay, subjunctive. Then we also have the imperfect tense. Now the imperfect tense, it's also one of the past tense, but this one, it's used to talk about what you used to do. That's the key word, the operative word, used to do. While in the preterite, the past we talk about what you did, the imperfect tense we talk about what you used to do. Alright? So it's a different set of endings from the preterite. And you'll understand more about this as we go through the topics. Alright, after the imperfect tense, we're also going to be looking at interrogatives. And this is where we learn the different words that we use to ask questions. And it is very important that we learn the interrogative, especially for the oral exams, because that's where you'll be asked questions and that's where you'll respond to questions. And also on the listening exam, you will have questions being asked in Spanish, for which you choose the answers in Spanish. So you need to get familiar with the interrogatives, their spelling, okay? After interrogatives, we also need to learn a lot of situation functions. Alright, and by this I mean there are different words or phrases or expressions that you use in particular situations. Alright, so you learn these in order to do questions on the oral exams as well as on the written exam, where you're given a situation and you say how you would respond based on what is asked of you. Alright, so we have to learn a lot of phrases and expressions that has to do with answering questions based on particular circumstances or particular situations. Alright, in addition to that, we have to do a lot of vocabulary. Alright, we need the vocabulary for the listening exam as well as for the oral exam. On the listening exam, you're usually asked a lot of questions, and based on what you may hear in a particular situation or a particular announcement, when you're asked a question you may not hear, but the same word, a synonym might be used, and therefore you have to be familiar with a lot of vocabulary in order for you to understand what is being asked of you. Alright? Also on the written exam, you get some passages to answer some questions, and therefore your knowledge of vocabulary is going to help you to understand the passage in order to answer the questions correctly. Alright. Also, we are going to do a lot of reading comprehension, and therefore we're going to spend some time on pronunciation. Alright, on the pronunciation we look at the different sounds or the special sounds that are in Spanish, how the vowels are pronounced, what letters are silent, different sounds when two consonants come together or two vowels. And based on the pronunciation here, then we'll be able to help you to read a little more fluently and also to enunciate clearly. Okay? Alright, so these are some of the main topics. There are some other subtopics that we learn on these as we go along, but these are the major topics that you need to be able to master in order to do well on the 3 exams. Alright, let us go through the exams. Alright, as I said before, you'll be doing 3 exams for C6 Spanish. Okay, we have the oral exam, the written exam, and the listening. Alright. The oral exam is an exam that usually lasts roughly about 15 minutes, but it always depends on how the students answer. You might be able to complete that exam before 15 minutes. And you are required to do 3 things in this exam. And this exam is usually in the month of April. Alright, so of the 3 exams, the oral is the one that you usually get first. Alright. On the oral exam, you basically do 3 things. You're asked to read. Alright. You're asked to read a passage, and this passage probably might be about 120 to 130 words. And you'll be tested on your pronunciation, your enunciation. Now, this is where pronunciation comes in. So all the different practice that you do with the vowels and the silent letters and other special sounds, this will come out in the oral exam. Alright? Now, in addition to the reading now, you also have to do an interview. Alright, in the interview, you're asked some questions based on different topics. Now, the questions are asked in Spanish, and you answer in Spanish, of course. Alright, and the questions usually, they come from certain topics. For example, about your home and your family, about school, about recreation, about daily routine, and about your general interests. Also, you might be asked about travel or about your career choices. Okay, now the questions you're asked the questions randomly and you answer. So you can be asked from any of the categories that I already spoke about. Alright, now after the interview, then, well, not necessarily in the same order, not necessarily in any particular order, but you will be given some situations. Alright, so you're given 5 situations, really, 5 situation questions, and they're in part B, A and B. Okay, so you, for example, you may be asked, your situation may be that you have gone to the market and you, A, what do you ask the vendor? And then you respond. And B might say, what does the vendor say in response to what you ask the vendor? Okay, and you give those responses in Spanish. Alright, now for the situation questions, remember, in this exam, you are not to write on the sheet of paper that you're given. You just look at the situation, and when you go into the examiner, you answer the question. You do not write. It's an oral exam, so it's a speaking exam. Same thing with the interview. There's nothing that you're going to write on a piece of paper and enter the exam. You're asked the questions and you speak freely because you're communicating. It's an oral exam. Alright? And of course, the reading, you read fluently, and you do this by pronouncing your words correctly, by pausing. Just like in English, where you see commas and you pause, full stop, you stop at the full stop. you acknowledge the question mark. So if there's a sentence with a question, you read it and change your intonation. Alright, when you change your intonation, that's how we know if it's a question or it's a simple statement. Alright, so these are basically the 3 things that you do in the oral exam. You read a passage, you respond to some interview questions, and you respond to some situation questions as well. Alright, now as I said before, this exam basically might take the most 15 minutes. It usually depends on the students. There are students who will go into the exam and respond promptly and come out of the exam before the 15 minutes. But it's a maximum of 15 minutes, so you may leave the exam earlier than that, depending on how you answer the questions. Okay, so that's the oral. And as I said before, this is what you do usually in April. Alright? Then after that, now you go on to the month of May when you actually do the written exam. Alright, and the written exam, it's basically values the most mark of all the 3 exams. It's really 100 marks. Now you do 4 things in this exam. Alright, in the written exam you also do some situations. Okay, and these situations are the ones which you write down the responses. Alright, so unlike in the oral where you answer verbally, in the written exam, the situations that are there, usually 10, you write your response in Spanish. Alright, and the situations are not necessarily a full sentence. They can be a simple short answer or they can be a phrase. Okay, so you basically get 10 of these to answer in Spanish. Then there's another section of the written exam, and this section is where you choose between a composition and a letter. You choose between a composition and a letter, and you have to write roughly 130 words. 130 to 150, but you're not to write less than 130 and no more than 150. You will be penalized. You have to follow the instructions. Alright, and that composition or letter is written in Spanish, totally in Spanish, and you write it based on the question that you're given. Alright, and this now is where you will come in using a lot of the future tense or probably a little of the future tense, depending on what the question asks you. For example, if the question asks you to write a composition about a fun day at your school, or Jamaica Day at your school, or sports day at your school, you know that's definitely talking about the past. Therefore, you'll be using a lot of future tense verb, alright, to describe whatever you're describing. Alright, and it's the same thing depending on what you're asked in the letter. For example, suppose you were asked to write a letter explaining about a Spanish country, and a Spanish country that you'd like to visit. Alright, then you'll be using a little of the future tense and a little of the conditional tense. Alright, because you'll be employing the use of would. Alright, and of course, as I said before, it's 130 to 150. So you choose either the composition or the letter. You don't do the two of them, you choose one. Alright, so you write between 130 to 150 words. Okay, then there's a third section. Alright, and this section you also choose between a contextual announcement or a contextual dialogue. Alright, and for this section now, if you're doing the contextual announcement, you're given a situation and you're going to make an announcement. Now this announcement is more than an advertisement. Do not get it confused with advertisements, because when you do advertisements you just write in phrases and one word like that. But when you're writing the contextual announcement, you're writing in complete sentences. Alright? And you are to use 80 to 100 words. 80 to 100 words. Alright. It's the same thing for the contextual dialogue. You're going to use 80 to 100 words in Spanish to complete a dialogue. So, you will be given a part of a dialogue, and there are sections that you will fill in the missing information. You'll also be given cues as to what the dialogue is about, right, in the instruction. The same thing for the announcement. You're given the instruction as to what you're going to announce or what you're going to report about. Okay? So you use 80 to 100 words in Spanish to do the contextual announcement or the contextual dialogue. Okay. Now, the last section of the written exam is the reading comprehension. Alright, now the reading comprehension is the section where you are given a story or a passage in Spanish. Alright, you're given a story or a passage in Spanish, and you're asked some questions on that same passage. However, the questions are asked in English and you answer in English. Alright, so you read the passage or the story, and then you look at the questions that are given there and you answer in English. Now, it is important that you answer using a complete sentence. Alright, so don't answer using a phrase, use a complete sentence. Alright, so after you've done that section of the paper, you would basically have finished the written exam. Alright, so let's recap. The written exam, it has 4 sections. Alright, the first section, you answer all questions. That is the situation. The last section of the exam, which is the reading comprehension, you answer all questions. For the second section, which is the composition or the letter, you choose between either of the two. The third section, contextual announcement or the contextual dialogue, you choose also. Alright, so basically 2 sections of the paper compulsory and 2 sections you get a choice, and that's it for the written exam. And that's, as I said before, that's values the most mark, so it's 100. Alright, the oral really values 80 marks. The written 100 marks. Alright, now let us look at the listening comprehension exam. Alright, now this is the last of the 3 exams, and this is in June. So this is April, May and June. Okay? For the listening exam, you get 60 questions, so it really values 60 marks. Alright, and it's 60 multiple choice questions, and they're all Spanish. 60 multiple choice questions. Alright, this section is basically 4. Alright, you have the first section where you get some I refer to them as picture stimuli questions. In other words, you get a series of pictures and then you listen to a statement by the examiner, and based on the statement that you hear, you match it with a corresponding picture. Now on your exam paper, you're not going to have any statement. It's a listening exam, so only the person who is reading the statement is going to have a statement. You are going to have on your paper just the series of pictures. So you listen and associate the picture with what you hear, and then you shade on your answer sheet whether it is A, B, C, or D. Alright? Then you have another section that I refer to as the voice stimuli. Alright, in this section you hear some phrase or some words that are spoken in a particular location, and then now you associate it with who is talking, or you maybe ask where is the person, or what is the person doing, what does the person want, and you're asked that in Spanish. And then now you look at your answers that you have on your answer sheet for responses, and you associate the question you hear with whatever is on the answer sheet. So you determine based on the question that you hear, where is the person? For example, you could hear a statement that says, ¿Cuánto cuesta la naranja? ¿Cuánto cuesta la naranja? And then the question that comes after says, ¿Dónde está la persona? ¿Dónde está la persona? Where is the person? You may have four responses. In Spanish, you could have mercado, supermercado, baño, or cantina. And then you would choose your response based on the question that is asked. Okay? Alright, then there's another section now that you're going to hear some announcements. Alright, basically it's two announcements that you'll hear, and then you're asked 3 questions on each announcement. Okay, so you hear one announcement where somebody is giving some information. For example, it could be, the setting could be on the beach side where the lifeguard is giving out some information to those who are there, telling them something like do not go far out into the water because the waves are rough, or something like that in Spanish. And then now you'll be asked 3 questions about the announcement that was given by the lifeguard, and the 3 questions are going to be in Spanish, and then now the answers are going to be on your answer sheet in Spanish. You are not going to see the questions, you're going to hear the questions being asked by the examiner, and then on your paper now you're going to look for the response that you think is correct based on the question, and then of course you shade on your answer sheet. Alright, then now you have another section which is either a story or a passage. Okay, now this story, or usually it's a story, and the title is given in English, so you can have an idea of what the story is about based on the title. Now when the story is going to be read about 3 times, alright, the first time it will be read at a normal pace and you listen. It will also be read again, and this time when it will be read, it will be read in 2 parts, in part A and part B, and you listen. At this time you can also make jottings to determine some of the answers to the questions on the paper that you have. Now these questions are in English and the responses are in English on your paper. Okay, alright, so then the story is going to be read another time. Remember I said it will be read 3 times. Alright, it's going to be read another time, and while it's been read, at this point you can start shading in your answers if you think you're sure about what it should be. And then after it's read, alright, you are allowed now to complete your answers. So you're given about 5 minutes more to go back through and make your final answers. Remember that when the story has been read, you can make your jottings. At the first reading, you're not expected to write down any answer. Alright? The whole story is read through first. The whole story read through all at once. On the second reading, the story is read through in two sections, part A and part B. And then on the last reading, the whole story is read again through. So you can make your final decision as to your answers. Okay. Alright, so that's basically what the listening exam entails. Alright. You get a series of pictures for you to choose your answers. You get some statements, voice statements, for you to choose some answers. You get some announcements and questions. And you also get a story or a passage. And this is the only section where you will have the questions in English and the answers in English. For these three sections, they're all in Spanish. Alright. So that basically explain what you're expected to do for the CXC Spanish, your oral exam, your written exam, and your listening exam. Alright, and as I said before, the written exam values the most marks, alright, which is 100, and the listening 60, and the oral 80. Now all of this is combined together for you to get your overall score as to whether you pass or fail. The oral exam will be done locally in your individual schools by the person assigned by the ministry. Alright, and your written exam will be done under your normal exam conditions as well as the listening exam. Alright, so that basically explains what the CXC Spanish exam is all about. Alright, basically you have roughly 10 topics, but there are a lot of subtopics that would fall under each that we need to cover for the exam. Alright, and as I said before, your syllabus actually begins when you start Spanish from grade 7. So all those things that you have learned from grade 7, like how to say what the time is, what your name is, all of those are important. So whenever you're reviewing, you have to review those as well. Because things like those, the simpler things that you've learned, things like those can appear in your oral exam. Alright, simple questions like those. And they can also appear on the situation section. For example, you could have a situation where it says that you're standing in a supermarket and somebody approaches you who is from a Spanish speaking country and they want to find out the time. Okay, what do they ask you? And of course you know that's K or S, and that's an example of a situation. Now even though we don't have time listed on this as one of the topics, it's something that you have learned before. It's something that has to do with daily living. And Rose said we're going to learn some vocabulary and expressions that have to do with daily living. And all of these, it comes under situation functions. Okay, like telling the time, saying your name, asking what your favorite color is, and things like those. So all the things that you have learned before from grade 7 straight up to grade 9, they are as important as what is here in order for you to prepare yourself thoroughly and be well prepared to do well in the CXC Spanish, both in your oral, your written, and your listening exam. Alright, thank you for listening. Ciao.
That's it.